So, good evening, everybody. And once again, we are back with this Civil's daily initiative of daily answer writing called CD Answer Wars. And today is the day 10 of this initiative. And again, in the morning, we had given you a question. We got very many responses, and all of you are doing well, writing well. I have checked some of the answers. We will also discuss some of them in this session. And the peer review part is also going on well. Keep peer reviewing, guys. And if you want an upgrade, you can join the CD Answer Wars Prime initiative for like personalized feedback and evaluation. The link to which I have posted in the chat box. So good evening, Archana. Good evening, Sweta. The question today was India's higher education institutions, HEIs, are plagued with many administrative and operational issues. Discuss. Suggest ways to overcome them and improve the state of HEIs. Now, higher education institutions is a very important topic from the mains perspective because in GS2 there is a part of the syllabus which concerns health and education. So this becomes a very important topic for that part, and also this is in news a lot because of that issue with governors and all, vice chancellor of the universities, and then we also saw it in news during the NEP National Education Policy release and the instructions in that policy for improving our higher education institutions. So again, we will go with that same framework, the introduction, body, and conclusion part. The question was pretty clear in itself. There was like nothing that you can not fathom here in the question. So it was basically asking about the administrative and operational issues in the higher education institutions. Like here, very clearly it is written. So you had to just write two sections, basically one talking about the administrative issues, other one talking about the operational issues, and also the way forward was very clearly asked, like ways to overcome them and improve the state of HEI. So this was the way forward that you have to write. Now, since the word here is given discuss, so what you could have done extra was to like mention some of the government initiatives which have helped our HEIs to get into a better shape, like how we are tackling the issues that have riddled our HEIs. You could have mentioned some of those. But basically, this administrative and operational issues part and the way forward was a must for this answer. So if you had written those things, you could have expected a decent enough marks. So let us first see what all we could have written, the content part. So I have also tried to prepare an answer, like not a model answer, but what basic things you should have written in the answer to get some get decent enough marks. So I have started with the current affairs. These like I have told you guys that in the introduction you can just mention some fact, you can define the topic, or you can give a current affairs related to the question. So here you could have just talked about higher education institutes, like what all are the like many HEIs are there in India, but they are lacking in ranking and all. So you could have just given a generic conclusion, that generic introduction, that too would have been fine. But what I have done is like I have tried to integrate this national education policy in my introduction to give it a touch of current affairs. For example, I have written that drawing on the objectives of the NEP 2020, which has provisions to transform colleges into either multidisciplinary universities or degree awarding autonomous institutions, the UGC recently unveiled its guidelines for transforming higher education institutions into autonomous institutions. So the UGC has recently unveiled these guidelines to transform the HEIs into autonomous bodies, like free from, not exactly free, but still somehow some a bit free from the state and government control. So you could have talked about this. This was in news also, like many editorials were there when this happened. So after this, you could have come straight to the point that HEIs in India are riddled with issues as discussed below. So again, in this part, I have first talked about the administrative issues. Administrative issues are those issues like which hamper the performance of HEIs for a long time. Like it is not exactly the issues, day-to-day issues, but like those issues which is imposed upon the government, imposed upon these institutes by the government of the day. So you can talk about those administrative issues first. Here I have talked about the irregular appointments. You must have gone through news or seen that in many universities, like teachers, professors are appointed on a very ad hoc or contractual basis. You can say, like there are no fixed terms of appointment for them, and that is a very like pertinent issue, because no one will give their best if their appointment itself is not fixed. So I've talked about that first. Like the system is such that appointments are made at various levels as temporary and ad hoc appointees, casual and guest lecturers. This is all contractual appointment, and these appointees are paid fixed sums far below salary scales. So salary scales is also not applied, since these are not permanent appointments, and there are breaks in service also, and this hampers the performance of these professors as well as the institutes. So you can talk about this. Next, you could have talked about the procedural and bureaucratic delays. Like what happens is the state and union governments themselves are uh, involved in a tussle, and which impacts these higher education institutes. So there is a tussle between the state and union governments, which is harming state universities, which are dependent on central government's funds, including the newly announced institutes of eminence. So there was an announcement of IOEs. If you have gone through that news, 10 institutes of eminence was established, but after that, like, it went off the circuit. Like no further news was uh, there about these institutes and what all performance, what all improvements have been done. So you can talk about this. And what happens is, like, universities, state universities are also dependent on central government funds. So this leads to a tussle between the state and union governments over the administration of these institutes. Next, you can also talk about this license permit Raj. As you know, in industries, in previous times, like before 1991, there was a license permit Raj. Like government permitted some of the industries to get established, and only those industries had the monopoly in the state. So that has also percolated to academia in recent times, and it has affected academia adversely. You could have talked about this. And next, as you can, this is a very common issue, like the restrictions on free speech and writing and politicization of minuscule issues has increased. As you have seen, like in JNU and all those institutes, they are like every 2 months, 3 months, they are in news for these things. So you could have mentioned this. Increasing interference of politicians in the management of higher education jeopardizes the autonomy of HEIs. Also, there is like the board of these HEIs, they constitute a lot of politicians, like due to the money power they have, and this in turn impacts the management of higher education in these HEIs. So these were some 4 5 administrative issues which you could have written. After that, you could have moved to the operational issues. Now operational issues are those issues which are like occurring on a day to day basis for like in order to have an efficient functioning of the institute. These day to day issues need to be resolved, otherwise, like, this itself will hamper the performance of these institutes. So you could have talked about the operational issues. In operational issues, you could have talked about high vacancies. If there is a lot of vacancies, how do you expect that the institutes will perform well? So you could have talked about this faculty shortages and the inability of the state educational system to attract and retain well qualified teachers have been posing challenges to quality education for many years. Here you could have given a data point to substantiate your like this point. So here, for example, I have talked about 30% of posts in central universities were vacant, including 40% vacancies of professors. So that is a very large number, and this is a very major operational issue that affects these higher educational institutes in India. Next is about the lack of funds. This is also one of the most important issues. Like already our budget for education is low. After that, the lack of funds is a further big, like further imposition upon these institutes, which affects their performance. So the budget for central universities rose by 6.6% this year, which is minuscule if inflation is adjusted. So you can see that inflation is rising at such a rate. So even if we are spending 6.6% of our budget, but still this is minuscule compared to the other, like other developed countries and all, where education is taken more seriously than what we take it in India. Traditionally, the state paid for salaries and maintenance, and the Center for Development through the UGC, whose funding schemes are largely suspended. Also, there is a tussle in like UGC. Like, there are many different governing bodies for different types of institutions, and funding for all of them comes to different channels. So these are some of the issues regarded to funding which you could have talked about. Next, I have written about a simple point. Freedom of operation of universities is curtailed by both state and union governments. This was like just an additional point uh, to show you that operational issues are also affected by the state and union governments, because if you keep on interfering in the day-to-day issues of these institutes, of course, like they will suffer. So this point can also be written. So this was the basic issues that you needed to write. and that would have been, I think, sufficient. After this, what you could have done is like you could have talked about three, four government schemes. For example, there are schemes such as this. You could have talked about national education policy. Since I have mentioned NEP in the introduction, I just avoided it and tried to frame the answer in a basic minimum manner so that all of you could get what was the must for writing this answer. However, you could have talked two, 3 points from NEP, National Education Policy, that these are the plannings that the government plans to do in order to improve these institutes. You could have talked about there is an initiative called Gyan, where like we are trying to bring in foreign teachers, foreign professors to teach in our institutes to improve the faculty vacancies and all of those. So you could have talked about that. Then there was a scheme called revitalizing infrastructure in education, like RISE, I guess. So you could have also talked about that. So these three, four schemes would have been sufficient enough. There was no need to write like a long, lengthy page on what all government has done, because that is not the core demand of the question. It has not been asked. So some of you guys have written that. So I think that could have been avoided. Just a basic flow chart, like three, four schemes and a short description of the schemes would have been sufficient. Next, you could move to the way forward. Now, this was exclusively asked in the question, so you had to pay attention a bit to the way forward, because just writing 1 or 2 points would not cut it, because one part of the question is exclusively asking about what do you think is the way forward, and how this issue of these problems in the HEIs in India could be avoided. So you could have written some 4 or 5 points and some good points in order to get some better marks. For example, I have talked about, first of all, like we saw in the body, you could have picked points from the body itself, like whatever issues are there, you just needed to think on those lines, that how this particular issue can be resolved, and given a suggestion to resolve that issue. So that is a pretty decent way of thinking how to write a way forward if you don't remember anything. So in way forward, I have talked about like public and private HEI both must be kept away from political affiliations and provided with good infrastructure and facilities. So this is an important point. And after that, I've talked about more autonomy. Has also been talked about by a national education policy. So I have lifted this point from there. You can say allowing more autonomy and freedom of teaching, research, and publication to the faculties is the need of the hour. Next, I've talked about collaboration between Indian higher education institutes and top international institutes. As you can see that every year the rankings, international rankings of HEIs get released, and most of the Indian institutes are like far below in that. In top 100, sometimes one, or even in top 500, we have very few institutes. So the collaboration with like the top institutes of at the international level could help us understand our bottlenecks and help us to improve whatever deficiencies we have. So you could have mentioned this. Linkages between national research laboratories and research centers of top institutions for better quality and collaborative research should be generated. So there is also an issue, like there are many research laboratories which function independently in India, like CSIR labs, and there are also like a National Metallurgical Laboratory in Jamshedpur. There are many such laboratories which function independently. So those could be linked to our higher education institutes to have a better quality of research in India. Next, you could talk about the multidisciplinary approach, so that student reading one subject does not get like he does not get the knowledge of any other subject in India. So that scope can be removed, and we can get a multidisciplinary approach. For example, we can just choose electives or something like that. So that multidisciplinary approach will also help in the holistic growth of the students of HEIs. Next, the state level HEIs. These HEIs are those which have the most number of issues. So the revamping of these higher education institutes, state level higher education institutes, is pretty necessary, and they must come up with a new vision and programs specifically addressing the needs of the state, its industry and economy and society. So there should be a practical contribution of these HEIs. There is no meaning if they are just existing on their own. So a practical contribution part should also be included in these state level HEIs for the growth of that state itself. Next, you could have talked about the same set of norms. Like there are different norms. For example, IIMs and IITs are governed by different set of norms, and the state level institutes are governed by a different set of norms. So this norms could be universalized across the country for regulation, accreditation, and academic standards. So this point could have also been mentioned. After that, I have also talked about affiliation of colleges is to be phased out in 15 years, and a stage-wise mechanism to be established for granting graded autonomy to college. This is basically like some institutes. What happens is they get an affiliation, and after that they really go off the radar. Like they don't perform well, and there's no one to check what is happening and what all is going on. So this affiliation could be restricted in the terms like 15 years is a term that could have been given. Affiliation can be given for 15 years, and after that a review and all can be done, so that to determine whether this college or institute can still continue getting the affiliation, and if there are needs for improvement, those improvements should be implemented in those colleges. So this was a decent way forward. Also, like I have written many points, five, six, 7 points. Even if you could have talked about 4, 5 out of these things, that would have been a decent enough way forward. But try to mention more number of points, because this has been exclusively asked in this question. In the end, I've just concluded talking about the bit futuristic conclusion, like talking about why we need to really improve our HEIs, and that is the need of the hour. Like development, as you all know, development cannot occur without like education really reaching to the grassroots. Still, our literacy rate is low. So I have just mentioned that we need to increase our GER, gross enrollment ratio, from current 26% to 50%, and this has also been talked about by National Education Policy. So again, I have talked about that only. And next, I have said ended on a generic futuristic note, that the path of economic technological gains and development to percolate at the grassroots level, we need education to be taken on a priority basis. So this was a decent enough again conclusion which you could have written. You could have just mentioned some of these keywords like economic technological gains, GER. So you can see that I have just tried to include data also wherever, some of the data points also wherever possible, so that the answer like contains all the facets, like both the explanation and the. I have just not, some of you have, what you all have done is like you have given the points, but there are no data points to back it up. So you can just try doing that also, so that the examiner knows that you have the holistic knowledge. You have also the knowledge of the existing state of HEIs in India. You are just not giving like some gyan. So you can just give these data points to substantiate whatever you are saying, whatever issues you are mentioning. So this was basically the structure of the answer which you could have written. Talking about the operational and administrative issues, a way forward, decent enough introduction and conclusion. These were the minimum things that you needed to write. After that, you could have also given 3, 4 points discussing what all has been done and how the government is planning to like improve the state of HEIs in India. So if you could have written all of these things, I think you could have got good marks. Now, if you have any doubts, you can ask me in the chat box. Otherwise, we will move to the evaluation of the copies, some of the copies that you all guys have written. Vivek, good evening. Sahiba, good evening. Harji, good evening. Rishabh, good evening. Nisha, good evening. So let us move to the evaluation part. What all you have written, let us check and try to understand how the evaluation is done, and what improvements you can make to your answers. So first of all, this is Harji's copy. She has been quite consistent in the past, so I think I thought to check her copy live. So question is fine. Introduction is also decent. Higher education, including university. So yeah, she has just defined the HEI, but higher education institutes are very like try giving definitions on in those answers, like where the word does not clearly is not clearly understandable. Like if the word is hard, tough enough, you can just try to define it, or there is some new term. Like here, higher educational institutes is a very basic term which like everyone will understand. It is self-explanatory basically. So there is no need to define it. Although you can do this also if you have not got anything better. But if you can write some current affairs related facts or some rankings of like higher education institutes in India are ranked pretty low. So these things you would have mentioned to get some extra like impressive introduction. India's high. This is fine. Like here you have written good. So you could have just mentioned that India's high, even though India's higher education system is the third largest in the world, still we are like lacking behind in the rankings. So that would have been a good introduction. Issues is fine. So you can just divide it into 2 parts, like administrative and operational, because both the terms are mentioned in the question, and you need to pick those keywords from the question. Enrollment is fine. Gender quality education is also good. Vacancies, outdated curriculum, low academic research. So this is fine that you have included some data points also, so to substantiate your points. Regulatory issues is also good. So politicization of these institutes is missing, so you can add that. And the most important thing that you could have done here is like dividing it into separately into administrative and operational issues. Otherwise, most of the issues are mentioned, and I think that is fine. Content is decent, good. So way forward is good. Revamping curriculum, filling up vacancies, increase budget allocation, implement new initiatives, creating. So again, these new initiatives are already implemented, I think. So try giving those points which we can do further in way forward. You can basically, if you have gone through this NEP 2020, you will get many points. Like they have many recommendations. So if you are smart enough, you can just pick up three, four of those recommendations and mention them here in the way forward. Because these have not been implemented, and the NEP is like a very standard source which talks about the education in India. So that will be very good for this way forward. Education is so. ठीक है, conclusion is good. Education is the pathway to any nation building enterprise. Okay. Yeah, there's some issues in structuring. Otherwise, I think content of the answer is good. Good that you have used data to like data points to substantiate your arguments. Introduction can be a bit better. So I think out of 15, you will get 6 for this answer, Harji. Now let us move to Pooja's copy. India's higher education system is the third largest in the world. So I think this this introduction is a bit not related to what is going to come ahead. If you are this question in this question, you will just talk about the issues that are plaguing our institutes. So try to give a base for that thing. This introduction seems to say that in the body you will be writing about what good qualities we have in our HEIs, but that is not the demand of the question. So in place of this line, like this second line, you could have just talked about the rankings and all. Funding issues is fine. Low enrollment is also. Again, you could have just divided it into two parts, like administrative and operational. Otherwise, this is fine. Some points are missing in this content. I think you have not talked about like faculty issues of faculty, like contractual basis appointments, politicization, and all. So those are like very important points regarding to this question. So you can mention those things. Most of your points are operational, basically. National education policies, okay. So this is good. This is a good innovative point, like Nordic model. You can just pick up examples and show that like from the successful countries, we can just implement some of those good points from there. Way forward is good, like you have written elaborately. So Pooja, I think second part of your answer is good, but in the first part, content can be improved a bit. Like in the body, also lesser points are there. Structuring is also an issue, and introduction can also be better. So I think you will get 5 out of 15 in this answer, Pooja. Next, we move to Vivek's copy. There has been significant increase in. So this is good. Like I was just talking about this. Like you can just mention that in top 20, 200 institutes we are not there. So again, you have also just mixed up both. So you can divide this into two parts: administrative issues and operational issues. The low GER is a good point, but I think this is neither a very administrative issue or operational issue. So most of you guys have talked about this low gross enrollment ratio, but this is more of a societal issue, I can say. You just need to first talk about those issues that are coming from the government or from the institution itself, which are affecting the performance of these institutes. And you have just written like 2 points about GER only in the beginning. So you can improve this. You can start the answer by talking about what are the issues faced by like from politicization. Like you can talk about issues with faculty. There are a lot number of vacancies. which are unfulfilled, and all those things can be written first. Again, this is like rote learning, you can say, but this is you can write these things in introduction and conclusion. This is what arguments you have to like justify this. You are just quoting someone and saying that it is an issue. So fine, you can talk about rote learning. You can talk about you can just like mention that curriculum needs to be revamped and we have an outdated curriculum and all of those things, but try to write it in a better manner. Just picking up and a quote from someone in your main content is not advisable. I think you can just, if you wanted to write these things, this can just be mentioned in the introduction itself that these our HEIs have become centers of rote learning, and we are like only three of our HEIs are in the top 200. Shortage of faculty is fine. Give some data points to validate. Regulatory issues are also not mentioned. I think that could have been done. So again, some improvement in the content is required. Check out some of the good copies after this session. Way forward is fine. Performance with funding of universities merging different high. Here, just like I talked about giving affiliation, so you can mention those things. Promotion of exchange programs is also good. So yeah, okay. Way forward is quite elaborate, and I think again good. Conclusion is also fine. Like you have mentioned, NEP, SDG, and all of those things are good. So I will again say that your first part of the answer could have been better here. Structuring could also have been better by dividing it into two parts, and then you could have improved upon your content. Try to write these societal issues like afterwards. First, talk about the administrative and operational issues, and then go for these things. And introduction is good, so I think you will also get 5 out of 15 for this mark for this answer, Vivek. Next, we move to Avi's copy. So this is fine, like third largest. So see, you can write this introduction. This is good because you have just talked about HEI, generic introduction in the first line, and then talked about shown that what is going to come next in the answer. So this is fine, like dividing it into two parts. Administrative issues, high vacancies. High vacancies, I guess, is an operational issue. Like this affects the operation of the HEI. So you can mention it there. Here you can talk about like uh, lack lack of faculties basically. Lack of faculties due to like inefficient appointment process. Like there is that appointment of guest faculty or contractual appointment ad hoc basis. So those issues need to be fixed by the administration. So those are the administrative issues. Over regulation is fine. Politicization is also fine. Low budgetary allocation, again, this affects the operation. So I think you can mention it there. So growing privatization is not an issue, I would say, because privatization, if the number of HEIs are increasing, it is good for the country. You can talk about like higher cost of education better than this. For example, the most important impact of privatization is like the cost of education increases, and so that leads to like uninclusive education. So you can talk about that thing rather than just mentioning growing privatization. Operation issue is also fine. You have just like tried to give the data also, so that is very good. So good, I think government efforts are also mentioned. So I think that is also fine. So equiprice, Gyan, these are good points. Way forward is fine, making more autonomous HEIs, world class universities. Try to pick some points from this NEP 2020. So that will make, for example, like multidisciplinary approach. That was also a recommendation by NEP. So you can talk about that. Capitalizing on the full potential of higher education will lead into the demographic. So still a very good answer, I will say, and you should get 7.5 or at least for this answer, 7 to 7.5, I think, for this answer, Avi. Next, we move to signees copy. So good, second largest. I think this will be third largest, just to because HEIs in India are played with various issues, administrative issues. So yeah, you have tried to divide it into two parts, so that is good. Concurrent subject. This is good example, like you have talked about this politicization. Weak governance is also fine. Lack of funding is an operational issue which can be mentioned there. Uh, Try to mention some more points like in administrative issues. Content is a bit less, I will say. Poor infra, poor teaching capacity, fall in academic standards, will have private sector dominance. So yeah, Abhi, you can check like you private sector dominance, its negative effects you need to mention. Just mentioning like private sector dominance is not done. So she has mentioned here like interference of sponsors and trustees is rampant. So this is a issue which can be mentioned. You need to talk here about faculties and all. I think you have missed that point, and that is a very like pertinent issue. So try including that. Way forward is good. Better funding, sustaining quality education, scaling good. Actually, I've been making a chair multidisciplinary. It is okay. Government steps are also good. Nice use of flowchart, I will say. Like you did not take extra space and just mentioned like in very few words this thing. So decent answer, signing. Conclusion is also good. Just the administrative issues could have been written a bit better. Like more content could have been included in that, about faculties and all, politicization and all those things could have been written. Otherwise, your answer is also fine. I think you should get 7 out of 15 for this answer. Next, we move to Dipali's copy. Yes, has witnessed a tremendous increase in the number of universities. Okay, so good. This is a current affairs piece, and that is fine. Choose with HEIs in India. So again, nice use of table. Like you can try doing these things in your answers if you are like going out of space or word limit. So this is a nice approach. Administrative regulatory issues is fine. Poor infrastructure is okay. Faculty is okay. Needs to improve like Brazil. Like these things you can mention again in way forward because you also need to write a way forward. So try to write sharp points. Like just talk about what all issues are there. So you can talk about those like 30% vacancies are there, 40% of professor posts are vacant. Yeah, this is fine. So this is good. So nice, you have written well. Like issues are well mentioned. Government initiatives. Again, try to shorten it a bit. No need to write in such details. Just mention the short form and talk about like improving quality and accessibility, and that should be done. Kausal Vikas Yojana and Swayam portal, I don't think these are like very important from HEI's perspective. So we are just talking about how to improve the HEIs. We are not talking about how to skill our people. So you can try, you can avoid these points, I will say. Way forward is again short. So you have just like these government schemes could be kept short and way forward could have been increased because this has been asked exclusively and the examiner will like expect some good ideas from the student from the aspirants. So I think uh, try mentioning some of those NEP recommendations, National Education Policy recommendations in this. way forward. If you are like sort of content, you can pick it from there. Conclusion is again good. So I think because of way forward, some of your marks will be deducted. Otherwise, your answer is good. Like the body part, which where you have mentioned the issues are especially good. So still you will get 6.5 out of 15 for this answer, Dipali. Next we move to Nikhil's copy, but no Indian. Okay, introduction is fine. Current situation India है. Current situation नहीं पूछा है, so you cannot need not write this separately. अगर आप फॉर एग्जांपल अगर आपको लिखना भी है करंट सिचुएशन तो ट्राई टू इंटीग्रेट इट इन द इश्यूज. जैसे अगर इश्यूज में जब आप ग्रॉस एनरोलमेंट वाली बात लिखेंगे व्हेन यू राइट जीआर इन दिस इश्यूज यू कैन देयर मेंशन दिस डेटा पॉइंट, सो अलग से यू नीड नॉट राइट दिस. Poor regulation is fine. One size fits all approach is also good. Regulatory bodies is also good. Effective hiring policies and okay. थोड़ा डेटा डालिए. Try to add some data in all of this. कॉन्ट्रेक्चुअल बेसिस पे क्यों होता है, मतलब कितना अपॉइंटमेंट्स उस बेसिस पे होता है, सो यू कैन राइट अबाउट दोज थिंग्स. Here it is good. You have written like given the data. ठीक है, decent enough. I will say body. You have mentioned like many points and divided it into two parts also, so that is good. Next, here you can mention some of the schemes before moving on to the way forward. Schemes members, you can just say like we are on the path to improving our HEIs and government has implemented some of the schemes और दो तीन schemes के नाम लिख दीजिए and that should be enough. After that, you can move to the way forward. Okay, you have integrated here itself. बट ठीक है, बट इन वे फॉरवर्ड इट इज बेसिकली व्हाट नेक्स्ट नीड्स टू बी डन, सो उसको थोड़ा सा schemes को अलग से लिख दीजिए. आई थिंक दैट विल बी बेटर बिकॉज दीज थिंग्स आर ऑलरेडी बीन डन एंड हैव नॉट लेड टू द इम्प्रूवमेंट to the point we desire. So you can just talk about the scheme कि we are trying to implement, but way forward में आप कुछ अपने ideas, innovatives या फिर जो नहीं implement हुए हैं, those ideas which have not been implemented and which can lead to further improvement of these HEIs, those ideas can be mentioned. For example, ये NEP से आप उठा सकते हैं बहुत सारे points. And I did not understand why are you like making a table here. Way forward, you can just write 1 2 3 4. इसमें अलग से टेबल फॉर्म में लिखने की क्या जरूरत है? I don't think that is required here. ठीक है, decent, good enough answer. I think content is fine, structure is also fine, everything is good. Try to write a bit more in a neat and clean manner. और ये एक्स्ट्रा टेबल्स वेबल्स बनाने की जरूरत नहीं है. यू कैन जस्ट रिड्यूस सम ऑफ दीज पॉइंट्स लाइक एक्सेलेंस में इतना नहीं, जस्ट कन्वे व्हाट यू वांट टू से and no need to like give 4 points, 4 sub points for every way forward. So I think you will also get 6 out of 15 for this answer. ये लिखने की जरूरत नहीं थी. For if you have written this and therefore you had, I think you had to draw the table in the way forward. So 6 out of 15 you will get for this answer, Nikhil. Next we move to Sahiba's copy. ठीक है, in introduction she has mentioned a data point about graduates being unemployable. But again, this is more related to the operational issues of the institutes itself. So institutes के बारे में लिखिए rather than graduates. Also otherwise ये भी चलेगा, लेकिन better वो होगा कि आप institutes के बारे में लिखेंगे तो. But still fine in introduction. In the present scenario, following are the main challenges. तो अगेन ये जी आप बाद में लिख सकते हैं. नहीं नहीं, you have just like gone a bit off radar here. Go according to the question. Up you main issues and challenges is not asked. What is asked is administrative and operational issues. So just divide it into administrative, operational. What you have done is you have just written issues and challenges, and then you have written everything you know. Inclusion, education is a societal issues of gender disparities are fine. You can mention these as sub points in the latter part of the answer, but rural urban disparities up to society, you have just mentioned more of the societal issues what we have, what we are facing, rather than what these institutes or the states and governments have themselves created the issues. Those issues were required in this answer. Also some clear piece of writing will be better, I guess. There's a funding issue. This is from the top down approach, so these things need to be mentioned more. Vacancies here, ठीक है. Poor research is also good. Education quality, academic research, ये these things could be this, ये जो पहले दो पॉइंट्स आपने लिखे हैं, this could be written in written letter, और इसमें इतना लिखने की जरूरत भी नहीं है. This makes your answer a bit also presentable, presentation wise also makes it look bad, or is not required to be written in such detail what you have written here. These points are good. Also try to divide it into two parts. That will be good. Measures is fine, way forward is okay. तो इसमें फिर न्यू इनिशिएटिव्स को आप अलग से लिख सकते हैं. गवर्नमेंट अप्रोच, वन और टू पॉइंट्स, और ट्राई टू इंक्लूड मोर पर्टिनेंट पॉइंट्स. अब ये हैकाथॉन से तो HEIs इंप्रूव नहीं हो जाएंगे ना, तो ट्राई टू राइट व्हाट द गवर्नमेंट इज डूइंग टू इंप्रूव द फैकल्टीज, और talk about this new education policy has been launched, and this talks about autonomous, making the institutes autonomous. So those things are more important. So this is fine, like multidisciplinary approach and all. Okay, you have written here. तो फिर वहां वो लिखने की जरूरत नहीं थी. This incentives could have been, new initiatives could have been avoided here. This is good. GCI and all. Conclusion is also fine, Sahiba. So I think decent answer content wise ठीक है थोड़ा सा, लेकिन मतलब extra things are written which are not required, and थोड़ा सा presentation can be improved for this answer. Like यहाँ पे ये सब समझ नहीं आ रहा है कि कहाँ आपने क्या लिखा है, तो और इतना भी डेटा नहीं डालना है कि एग्जामिनर कुछ पढ़े ही ना है. नो वन विल रीड सो मच डेटा पॉइंट्स यू आर राइटिंग. So it seems like you have just, if you are remembering these data points, this is very good, but I don't think you will be able to remember so much data in the exam hall. So try to include like ऐसा डेटा दीजिए 30% 40% राउंड अबाउट करके, कि जिससे जो विच आर इजी टू रिमेम्बर, विच यू कैन अगेन रिप्रोड्यूस इन द केस ऑफ if the question is asked in the examination. So I think you will get 5.5 out of 15 for this answer, Saiba. Otherwise, ठीक आंसर है, थोड़ा सा improve on the lines I've mentioned, otherwise it is good. So that was it for today, guys. I think I reviewed some of the copies, and again we will come back tomorrow with this day 11 of CD Answer Wars and CD Answer Wars Prime. Keep writing, keep peer reviewing. That is an important part of this initiative, and I hope you are enjoying this, and your answer writing is also improving in the process. I will post some good copies. कुछ copies में डाल दूंगा Telegram group में. You can just note some good points from there and add it in your notes to make your notes also ready for this topic. So again, we will meet tomorrow and discuss a new question, new topic. So that is all for today, guys. Thank you. Thank you very much. Manujanshu sir, drawing a fine line. Yeah, Manujanshu, थोड़ा सा fine line था administrative and operative issues. But operative issues are basically those issues which are जो डे टू डे परफॉर्मेंस को अफेक्ट करते हैं. जैसे अगर पैसा नहीं है, लो फंडिंग, लो बजट, तो वो डे टू डे ऑपरेशन को अफेक्ट करेगा. देर आर ए लॉट नंबर ऑफ वैकेंसीज इन द फैकल्टी पोस्ट, तो वो ऑपरेटिव इश्यूज हैं. लेकिन administrative are like those are long term policies, or like the way these institutes are being handled by the government or the board of the institution itself. अब low vacancies is an operative issue, but low vacancies हो क्यों रहे हैं? Because of that policy of की contractual और guest laborers, guest lecturers, तो उसके चलते हो रहा है ना. तो वो एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव इशू हो गया, उसको आपको चेंज करना पड़ेगा. उस पॉलिसी को मतलब परमानेंट अपॉइंटमेंट्स लाने पड़ेंगे, सो दैट इज एन एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव इशू. तो उस बेसिस पे थोड़ा डिवाइड कर सकते थे हम लोग. बाकी थोड़ा एक दो पॉइंट अगर आप इधर उधर भी करते तो वैसा नहीं था, बट स्टिल द मेन थिंग वाज यू कैन जस्ट डिवाइड इट इनटू टू पार्ट्स एंड राइट अकॉर्डिंग टू दोज लाइंस. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Again, we will meet tomorrow and discuss a new topic.